The conference room fell silent as Sarah Martinez walked in, her heels clicking against the polished floor. 23 pairs of eyes followed her every move, some curious, others skeptical, and a few openly dismissive. She was the only woman in a room full of seasoned military veterans and defense contractors, and everyone knew it. What they didn't know was that the quiet intelligence analyst sitting at the far end of the table had once held the record for the longest confirmed kill shot in Navy SEAL history. What they couldn't imagine was that behind her calm demeanor lay years of classified operations that would make their most decorated officers pale in comparison. In the next hour, their assumptions would crumble, their prejudices would be exposed, and one woman's hidden past would change everything they thought they knew about courage, skill, and what it truly means to serve your country. This is the story of how a single moment of truth can shatter a lifetime of lies, and how the most unlikely hero can emerge from the shadows to claim her rightful place in history. Sarah Martinez adjusted her reading glasses and glanced at the stack of classified reports on her desk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile government building where she had worked as a senior intelligence analyst for the past 3 years. To her colleagues, she was just another face in the sea of bureaucrats who kept the military machine running smoothly from behind the scenes. At 34, Sarah had mastered the art of being invisible. She dressed conservatively in navy blazers and neutral colors, kept her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and spoke only when spoken to in meetings. Her cubicle was neat and organized, decorated only with a small American flag and a photo of her late father in his army uniform. Nobody knew about the medals hidden in her apartment drawer, or the nightmares that still woke her up some nights. The morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the Pentagon at 7 sharp, coffee in hand, ready to dive into the latest intelligence reports from overseas operations. She had developed a reputation for being thorough and reliable, someone who could spot patterns others missed and provide accurate assessments that helped save lives in the field. Her supervisors valued her work, even if they never quite saw her as anything more than a competent desk officer. "Martinez, conference room 3 in 10 minutes, called out her supervisor, Director James Thompson, as he hurried past her desk. "Big briefing today. Department heads, contractors, the works. Bring the Afghanistan files." Sarah nodded and gathered her materials. She had been dreading this briefing for weeks. Word had spread that some of the old guard military contractors were pushing back against new intelligence protocols, arguing that desk analysts didn't understand real battlefield conditions. The tension had been building, and she could feel the storm coming. As she walked toward the conference room, Sarah passed through hallways lined with portraits of decorated heroes and memorials to fallen soldiers. Each face reminded her of people she had known, missions she had been part of, and a life she had left behind. She pushed those thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. The conference room was already buzzing with conversation when she entered. 24 men in expensive suits and military uniforms clustered around the large mahogany table, their voices carrying the confidence of those accustomed to being heard and respected. Sarah recognized most of them from previous meetings, though few had ever bothered to learn her name. She took her usual seat at the far end of the table, opened her laptop, and began reviewing her notes. Around her, conversations continued about budget allocations, troop deployments, and the latest equipment purchases. The men spoke with authority about combat zones they had visited briefly and operations they had observed from safe distances. "Gentlemen, let's get started," Director Thompson called out, taking his place at the head of the table. "We have a lot to cover today, including some pushback on our new intelligence protocols." Colonel Robert Hayes, a thick-set man with silver hair and multiple service ribbons on his chest, leaned forward. "Jim, with all due respect, these new protocols are written by people who have never been in combat. How can we expect field commanders to rely on assessments from analysts who have never heard a shot fired in anger?" Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Sarah felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral and continued taking notes. "The intelligence division has some of the brightest minds in the military," Thompson replied diplomatically. "Their analysis has prevented countless casualties." "Book smarts and street smarts are different things," interjected Marcus Webb, a defense contractor who had built his fortune selling communication equipment to the military. "I've spent months in Iraq and Afghanistan working with our boys on the ground. They need intelligence from people who understand what it's like to be shot at." More nods around the table. Sarah could feel eyes glancing in her direction, though no one addressed her directly. She was the only analyst present, the only woman, and clearly the target of this coordinated attack on her department's credibility. Defense contractor Paul Morrison, a tall man with a permanent scowl, joined the conversation. "Look at the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle. Intelligence failures led to American deaths. We need people making decisions who have actually been in those situations. That's a complex situation with multiple factors, Sarah said quietly, her first words of the meeting. Morrison turned toward her with barely concealed annoyance. Miss Martinez, isn't it? Have you ever been deployed? Have you ever been in a combat zone? The room fell silent. Sarah could feel every eye on her, waiting for her response. This was the moment she had been avoiding for 3 years, the question she hoped would never come. I have some field experience, she replied carefully. Morrison laughed and several others joined in. Field experience? What, a week-long fact-finding mission to a safe zone in Kuwait? Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. I prefer to focus on the current intelligence rather than past assignments. See, this is exactly the problem, Morrison continued, emboldened by the support around the table. We have people making life-and-death decisions who think field experience means visiting a forward operating base for a PowerPoint presentation. Colonel Hayes leaned back in his chair. Ma'am, I don't mean any disrespect, but when lives are on the line, experience matters. Combat experience. Have you ever had to make a split-second decision while taking enemy fire? Sarah's hands remained steady on her laptop keyboard, but inside, memories were flooding back. The weight of a rifle in her hands, the controlled breathing before a long-distance shot, the sound of her spotter's voice in her earpiece, the moment of absolute stillness before the trigger pull that would save her team's life. I understand your concerns, she said simply. The dismissive laughter that followed felt like a slap. These men, with their polished uniforms and safe assignments, were questioning her credibility based on assumptions and prejudices. They saw a quiet woman in a business suit and assumed she knew nothing about the realities of war. Here's what I don't understand, Webb said, warming up for what appeared to be a prepared speech. We're trusting our most sensitive operations to people who have never experienced the chaos of real combat. When bullets are flying and decisions need to be made in milliseconds, you need someone who has been there. Someone who knows what it feels like to have an enemy in their crosshairs. Morrison added, someone who understands the weight of pulling that trigger. Sarah's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hand. She set it down and folded her hands in her lap, using every technique she had learned to maintain control. Director Thompson tried to steer the conversation back to the agenda. Gentlemen, I think we're getting off track. Let's focus on the specific protocol changes. But Morrison wasn't finished. He had found his target and sensed weakness. No, Jim. This goes to the heart of the matter. How can someone like Miss Martinez here possibly understand the intel needs of a sniper team? How can she assess the reliability of field reports from special operations when she's never been in that world? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah stared at her hands, fighting an internal battle between the instinct to remain hidden and the growing anger at being dismissed so casually. A sniper team needs intelligence they can trust, Colonel Hayes added. They need to know their analyst understands the stakes. When you're lying in position for hours, waiting for the right shot, you need to know the person providing your intel has been in your boots. Sarah looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting Hayes's across the table. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and something harder and more dangerous showed through. You want to know about sniper teams, Colonel? She asked quietly. The tone of her voice caused conversations around the table to stop. There was something different about the way she spoke, a subtle change that made everyone unconsciously lean forward. Sarah, Director Thompson said carefully, sensing the shift in atmosphere. But Sarah was no longer looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Morrison, who had initiated this attack on her credibility. You mentioned crosshairs, Mr. Morrison. Split-second decisions. The weight of pulling the trigger. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. Tell me, how many confirmed kills do you have? Morrison laughed uncomfortably. I'm not claiming to be a shooter. I'm a contractor. But I work with these guys every day. Colonel Hayes, what about you? Hayes shifted in his seat. I've been in combat situations, but I was primarily logistics and planning. Sarah nodded slowly and looked around the table. So we have a room full of men questioning my ability to understand combat operations, and not one of you has actually been a trigger puller yourselves.
The silence stretched uncomfortably.
Several men looked away from her steady gaze. Sarah, Thompson warned again. But 3 years of being invisible, 3 years of listening to assumptions and dismissals, 3 years of hiding who she really was, had finally reached a breaking point. You want to know about sniper operations? She asked, her voice growing stronger. About what it feels like to hold a life in your crosshairs? About making decisions when lives hang in the balance? She stood slowly, her chair rolling back with a soft whisper across the carpet. Every person in the room was watching her now, sensing that something significant was about to happen but not quite understanding what. I spent 6 years as a Navy SEAL sniper, she said simply. The words hit the room like a physical force. Several people actually recoiled in their chairs. Morrison's mouth fell open. Colonel Hayes straightened up as if someone had just walked into the room wearing stars on their collar. That's impossible, Morrison stammered. Women aren't allowed in the SEALs. Sarah's smile was thin and cold. They weren't supposed to be. But sometimes impossible circumstances require impossible solutions. She remained standing, looking down at the table full of men who had spent the last hour dismissing her qualifications. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. Director Thompson cleared his throat. Sarah, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, she said firmly. These gentlemen wanted to discuss combat experience and qualifications. Let's discuss them. Colonel Hayes found his voice first. Ma'am, I need to understand what you're saying. Are you claiming to have been an active SEAL operator? I'm not claiming anything, Colonel. I'm stating facts. Classified facts that I've kept classified for 3 years while listening to people question my understanding of military operations. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Some men leaned forward, hungry for details. Others sat back, clearly skeptical. A few looked genuinely shaken. Morrison had recovered enough to launch a counterattack. Even if that were true, which I find highly doubtful, that would have been years ago. The modern battlefield is different. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. My last mission was 8 years ago. Afghanistan. Helmand Province. Operation Silent Guardian. Several people around the table recognized the operation name. It had been classified, but rumors had spread through military circles about an impossible rescue mission that had saved an entire forward operating base from being overrun. That operation is still classified, Colonel Hayes said carefully. Yes, it is, Sarah replied, along with most of my service record. But since Mr. Morrison seems to think I don't understand the realities of combat, perhaps it's time for some clarification. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. You want to know about split-second decisions? About the weight of taking a life? About what it means to have your team's survival depend on your skills. The room was completely silent now. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. Then let me tell you about the night I killed 11 Taliban fighters with 12 shots, while my team extracted wounded Marines from a compromised position. Let me tell you about holding a 2-kilometer shot in a crosswind while enemy mortars fell around my position. Let me tell you about what it really means to have lives depending on your analysis and your trigger finger. Director Thompson stood up. Sarah, I think we need to pause this discussion. But Sarah was no longer the quiet analyst who had walked into the room an hour ago. She was someone else entirely, someone who had been hidden for too long. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. You asked if I had ever been shot at. The answer is yes, frequently. You asked if I understood the pressure of making critical decisions in combat. I do. Better than anyone else in this room. She gathered her files and laptop, moving with a precision and economy of motion that several of the military men recognized but hadn't noticed before. My analysis stands on its own merit, she continued. But if you ever again question my understanding of combat operations, remember this conversation. Remember that the quiet woman at the end of the table has more confirmed kills than everyone else in this room combined. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. The briefing materials are in your folders. I recommend you read them carefully. Lives depend on good intelligence, and whether you like it or not, I'm very good at what I do. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving 23 speechless men staring at empty air where the most dangerous person in the room had just been standing. The Pentagon's corridors buzzed with whispered conversations for the rest of the day. Word of Sarah Martinez's revelation spread through the building like wildfire, carried by text messages, hushed phone calls, and quick conversations in empty offices. By 5 o'clock, half the intelligence division had heard some version of the story, and the other half was desperately trying to find out what they had missed. Sarah sat in her cubicle, trying to focus on her work while feeling the weight of every curious glance from passing colleagues. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, revealed a secret that had protected her for 3 years. The comfortable anonymity she had cultivated was gone forever. Replaced by a spotlight she had never wanted. Her computer pinged with a new email from Director Thompson. My office, now. She saved her work, gathered her jacket, and walked through the maze of cubicles toward Thompson's corner office. Conversation stopped as she passed, then resumed in urgent whispers behind her. She could feel the mixture of curiosity, admiration, and skepticism following her like a wave. Thompson's door was closed when she arrived. She knocked twice and heard his gruff voice call for her to enter. The director sat behind his massive desk, surrounded by stacks of classified folders and multiple computer monitors. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened and his hair showing signs of repeated finger combing. "Sit down, Sarah," he said without looking up from the document he was reading, and closed the door. She did as instructed, noting the tension in his voice. Thompson had always been supportive of her work, but this situation was clearly testing the boundaries of their professional relationship. "I just got off a conference call with the Secretary of Defense," he began, finally looking up. "Apparently, your revelation in that briefing has created quite a stir. People are asking questions, demanding verification, and generally causing my phone to ring every 5 minutes." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand this creates complications." "Complications?" Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, you just told a room full of defense contractors and military officers that you're a former Navy SEAL sniper. Those people have security clearances, connections, and the ability to make my life very difficult if they think someone is feeding them false information." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "So I need to ask you directly, and I need you to tell me the truth. Were you really a Navy SEAL?" The question hung between them like a bridge that could only be crossed once. Sarah had kept this secret for so long that revealing it felt like shedding an entire identity. "Yes," she said simply. Thompson nodded slowly, as if he had expected the answer, but still needed to process it. "And the operation you mentioned? Silent Guardian?" "Also true, along with 17 other classified missions over 6 years of active service." "Jesus Christ, Sarah." Thompson rubbed his temples. "Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts me in? My senior analyst has been operating under a cover identity for 3 years, and I had no idea." Sarah understood his frustration, but she also felt a flash of anger. "It wasn't a cover identity, Jim. It was my choice to start over, to build a life away from what I used to be. I've done good work here. My analysis has been accurate and valuable." "I'm not questioning your work," Thompson replied, "but I am questioning why you never told me about your background. That kind of experience could have been invaluable to our operations." "Because I didn't want to be defined by what I used to be," Sarah said firmly. "I wanted to be judged on my current abilities, not on my past achievements. And frankly, I wasn't sure how people would react to learning that a woman had served as a SEAL sniper." Thompson was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "The Navy's position on women in special operations has evolved over the years, but you're right that it would have raised questions. Questions I wasn't ready to answer until today. What changed? Why reveal it now?" Sarah thought about Morrison's smug face, about the casual dismissal of her expertise, about 3 years of being underestimated and overlooked. "Because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of listening to men who have never been in combat question my understanding of military operations. Tired of pretending to be less than I am." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "And now? Are you prepared for what comes next? Because there's no putting this genie back in the bottle. I know. There will be verification processes, background checks, people digging into classified records, media attention. If this leaks beyond military circles, your quiet life is over, Sarah." She had been thinking about exactly that for the past several hours. The prospect was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "I understand the risks." Thompson picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to her. "I made some calls, pulled some strings. Had a friend in Naval Special Warfare Command send over what they could release from your service record." Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at documents she hadn't seen in years. Her SEAL qualification certificate, mission summaries with most details redacted but enough information to confirm her claims, commendation letters from commanding officers, a photograph of her in full combat gear, rifle in hand, standing with her team after a successful mission. "According to this," Thompson continued, "you graduated at the top of your SEAL training class. You had the highest recorded accuracy rate for long-distance shots in the program's history. You received 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Navy Cross. Your commanding officers describe you as one of the most effective operators they've ever worked with." Sarah stared at the photograph, remembering the weight of the gear, The camaraderie with her team, the absolute clarity of purpose she had felt in those days. "Why did you leave?" Thompson asked gently. The question she had been dreading. The part of the story she had never told anyone. My last mission. Operation Silent Guardian. We were tasked with evacuating a forward operating base that was about to be overrun. Intelligence had failed to identify the size of the enemy force. What we thought was a routine extraction turned into a 12-hour firefight. She closed the folder but kept talking, her voice steady but distant. My spotter, Jake Morrison, was hit by sniper fire early in the engagement. I had to maintain position and provide cover while the medical team worked on him. For 8 hours, I held that position, taking shots to protect the evacuation. Jake died in my arms while I was still firing. Thompson waited, understanding that she needed to finish the story. We completed the mission. Everyone else made it out alive. But Jake was my best friend, my partner, and my responsibility. I couldn't continue after that. The Navy offered me a desk assignment, but I needed to get out completely. Start over. And you became an intelligence analyst. I wanted to use my knowledge to help people, but from a distance. I thought I could contribute without having to carry a weapon again, without having to make those life and death decisions. Thompson nodded, understanding more now about the quiet woman who had worked for him for 3 years. But today, those men pushed you too far. They questioned my competence based on their assumptions about who I am, or who they thought I was. I spent 6 years proving myself in the most elite military unit in the world, and I wasn't going to sit there and let a defense contractor tell me I don't understand combat. A knock on Thompson's door interrupted their conversation. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Director, Colonel Hayes is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Thompson and Sarah exchanged glances. "Send him in," Thompson called out. Colonel Hayes entered the office, his previous confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. He nodded respectfully to Thompson, then turned to Sarah with an expression that was part apology, part curiosity. "Ms. Martinez," he began, then corrected himself. "I'm sorry. What rank should I be using?" "Sarah is fine," she replied. "I'm not active military." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to apologize for this morning. I made assumptions about your background that were clearly incorrect. You weren't wrong to question my qualifications," Sarah said diplomatically. "You were wrong to assume what those qualifications were." "Yes, ma'am. I've been making some calls this afternoon, trying to verify it. Well, trying to understand what happened in that briefing. I spoke with Admiral Richardson at Naval Special Warfare Command." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Thompson noticed her hands tighten slightly in her lap. "The Admiral couldn't give me details, of course, but he confirmed that you were indeed a SEAL operator. He also said something interesting. He said you were the best sniper he'd ever worked with, and that your departure was a significant loss to the program. Admiral Richardson is very kind. He also said that Operation Silent Guardian is still classified, but that it prevented what could have been one of the worst military disasters in Afghanistan. He said lives were saved because of your actions that day." Sarah looked down at her hands. "A lot of people contributed to that mission's success. But you were the sniper who held the line while everyone else evacuated. That was my job." Hayes turned to Thompson. "Director, I need to ask, why wasn't this information available when we were assessing the Intelligence Department's capabilities? Having someone with Ms. Martinez's background and expertise would have answered a lot of our concerns." Thompson looked at Sarah, giving her the choice of how to respond. "Because I asked that it remain classified," she said. "I wanted to start fresh, to be evaluated on my current work rather than my past service. With respect, ma'am, that seems like a waste of valuable experience." "Perhaps, but it was my choice to make." Hayes nodded, accepting her decision even if he didn't fully understand it. "Well, I wanted to personally apologize and to let you know that Morrison and some of the other contractors are feeling pretty embarrassed about this morning. They shouldn't be. They had legitimate concerns about intelligence operations. The problem was their assumptions about who was providing that intelligence. Still, they feel like they made fools of themselves. Morrison especially. He's been bragging about his combat zone experience for years, and finding out he was lecturing a Navy SEAL about warfare has been humbling." Sarah almost smiled at that. "Mr. Puffle, Morrison has valuable experience working with field units. That perspective is important." Hayes looked relieved at her gracious response. "Thank you for saying that. I think this whole situation has been a learning experience for all of us." After Hayes left, Thompson turned back to Sarah. "You handled that well. He's a good officer. He was asking legitimate questions this morning, even if he asked them poorly." "So what happens now?" Do you want to go back to being the quiet analyst in the corner, or are you ready for people to know who you really are? Sarah thought about the question seriously. For 3 years, she had hidden behind a carefully constructed persona, safe but unfulfilled. This morning had felt like waking up from a long sleep. I don't think I can go back to being invisible, she said finally. But I'm not sure I'm ready to be the former SEAL sniper either. Maybe there's something in between. Thompson smiled for the first time that day. I think we can figure something out. Your expertise could be invaluable in training our newer analysts. Help them understand what intelligence means to people in the field. I'd like that. Good. But fair warning, Sarah. Word of this is going to spread beyond the Pentagon. Your story is remarkable, and people are going to be interested. Reporters, book publishers, documentary filmmakers. Are you prepared for that level of attention? Sarah had been dreading exactly that possibility. She valued her privacy, her quiet life away from the spotlight. But she also realized that hiding had its own costs. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, she said. And if someone asks you about Operation Silent Guardian specifically? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about Jake Morrison and the weight of secrets she had carried for 8 years. Then I'll decide how much of that story I'm ready to tell. Thompson nodded, understanding that some wounds took longer to heal than others. As Sarah walked back to her cubicle, she noticed that the atmosphere in the office had changed. People still looked at her with curiosity, but there was something else now. Respect. Recognition. The kind of acknowledgement she had earned years ago but had been hiding from ever since. Her computer showed 17 new emails, 12 missed calls, and a calendar invitation for a meeting with the Pentagon's Media Relations Office. Her quiet life as an invisible analyst was indeed over, but for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. The hardest part was yet to come. Deciding how much of her story she was willing to share with a world that was suddenly very interested in the quiet woman who had once been one of the deadliest soldiers in the American military. The leak came 3 days later. Sarah was reviewing intelligence reports when her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria. Sarah, you need to call me right now. There's a new story about you online. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Sarah opened her browser and searched her name. The headline from Defense Weekly made her blood run cold. Pentagon analyst revealed as former Navy SEAL sniper, first woman to serve in elite unit. The story was surprisingly accurate, which meant someone with high-level clearance had provided information. It mentioned her service record, Operation Silent Guardian, and the confrontation in the briefing room. Worse, it included quotes from anonymous sources who provided details that only people in that room could have known. Her desk phone rang immediately. Director Thompson's voice was tight with controlled anger. My office. Now. And bring your personal cell phone. Sarah walked through corridors that now felt different than they had just 3 days ago. Colleagues who used to nod politely now stared openly, whispering to each other as she passed. The attention she had dreaded was beginning to materialize, and she could feel the walls of her carefully constructed private life starting to crumble. Thompson's office was crowded when she arrived. Besides the director, there were 3 people she didn't recognize, all wearing the serious expressions of crisis management professionals. Sarah, this is Rebecca Chen from Pentagon Media Relations, David Torres from Legal, and Patricia Walsh from Security. We have a situation. Rebecca Chen stepped forward, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who radiated competence and barely controlled stress. Ms. Martinez, in the past 2 hours, we've received contact from CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, NBC, and at least 6 other major news outlets. They all want interviews about your service as a SEAL sniper. Some are claiming they have additional details about classified operations. Sarah sat down heavily. How bad is it? David Torres, the lawyer, consulted his tablet. The initial story doesn't reveal anything that would compromise national security, but it's opened a door that we're going to have trouble closing. There are already follow-up stories being written, and several reporters are digging into your background. More concerning, added Patricia Walsh from Security, is that this leak came from inside the Pentagon. Someone who was in that briefing room decided to share classified information with the press. Thompson's jaw was tight with anger. We're conducting an internal investigation, but the damage is done. The question now is how we handle the media attention. Rebecca Chen opened her laptop and showed Sarah a news website. The story has already been picked up nationally. It's trending on social media. There are people calling you a hero, others questioning whether the story is true, and unfortunately, some making very ugly comments about women in the military. Sarah scanned the comments section and immediately regretted it. Mixed in with supportive messages were vicious attacks on her credibility, her appearance, and her right to have served in the SEALs. The anonymity of the internet had brought out the worst in people. "What are my options?" she asked. "Legally, you can't discuss classified operations," Torres explained. "But your basic service record is now public information. You can confirm or deny your service, but you can't provide operational details." From a media perspective, Chen added, "You have three choices. You can refuse all interviews, which will likely result in more speculation and potentially inaccurate reporting. You can do one major interview to set the record straight. Or you can go full transparency and tell your story in detail. What would you recommend?" "Honestly, one carefully controlled interview with a trusted journalist. Get your version of the story out there, establish the facts, then go back to your private life." Patricia Walsh looked skeptical. "The security implications concern me. Even confirming basic information could put operational methods at risk." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the competing advice and the weight of decisions she had never wanted to make. For 3 years, she had successfully avoided exactly this situation, and now she was being forced to navigate it with people she barely knew. "I need time to think," she said. "Unfortunately, time is a luxury we don't have," Chen replied. "Every hour we don't respond, the story grows and gets more speculative. By tomorrow, there will be investigative reporters calling everyone you've ever known." As if summoned by her words, Sarah's personal cell phone began ringing. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Don't answer that," Torres advised. "It's probably a reporter." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again with a different number. Thompson leaned forward. "Sarah, I want you to know that whatever you decide, the department will support you. But you need to understand that this attention isn't going away. Your story is remarkable, and people are fascinated by it." "I never wanted to be remarkable," Sarah said quietly. "I wanted to be left alone." "I know, but sometimes circumstances choose us instead of the other way around." Rebecca Chen closed her laptop and looked directly at Sarah. "Can I ask you something? Why did you leave the SEALs? The story mentions you left after a successful mission, but it doesn't explain why." Sarah had been dreading this question since the story broke. The truth about Jake Morrison's death and her subsequent breakdown was something she had never discussed publicly, barely discussed privately, and certainly wasn't prepared to share with strangers. "Personal reasons," she replied. "Those personal reasons are going to be the focus of every follow-up story," Chen warned. "Reporters don't like gaps in timelines, especially when they involve decorated soldiers leaving successful careers. Maybe that's not their business." "I agree with you. But that won't stop them from digging." Torres checked his phone and frowned. "We have another problem. I just got a call from Admiral Richardson's office. Apparently, reporters are already calling Naval Special Warfare Command for confirmation of details. The Navy is going to have to make a statement." "What kind of statement?" "They'll confirm your service record and leave it at that. But once the Navy acknowledges that you were a SEAL, it becomes an official story. There's no walking it back." Sarah realized she was at a crossroads that would determine the rest of her life. She could try to minimize the attention and hope it went away, or she could take control of the narrative before others defined it for her. "If I do an interview," she asked Chen, "who would you recommend?" "Amanda Foster from 60 Minutes. She's done several military stories, she's fair but thorough, and she understands the sensitivity of classified information." "What would she want to know?" "Everything. Your background, your training, your missions, why you left, what you're doing now." "She'll be respectful but persistent." Sarah's phone rang again, then buzzed with 3 text messages in rapid succession. The outside world was closing in whether she participated or not. "There's something else we need to discuss," Patricia Walsh said carefully. "Your security. Once this story spreads, you're going to become a public figure. That comes with risks, especially given your background and the current political climate around women in the military." "What kind of risks?" "Harassment, stalking, potential threats from people who disagree with women in combat roles. We recommend increased security protocols for the immediate future." The weight of what her revelation had unleashed was beginning to sink in. What had started as a moment of frustration in a briefing room was becoming a fundamental change in her entire life. Thompson stood up. "Sarah, why don't you take the rest of the day to think about this? Go home, consider your options, and let us know what you decide tomorrow morning." "What if I decide I don't want to do any interviews? What if I just want this to go away?" Rebecca Chen's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Your story is too compelling, and there are too many people who want to hear it. The question is whether you tell it yourself or let others tell it for you." Sarah gathered her things and left the Pentagon through a back entrance that security had recommended. Even so, she noticed a news van in the parking lot and a reporter with a camera crew setting up near the main entrance. During the drive home to her Arlington apartment, her phone rang constantly. She turned it off and drove in silence, trying to process how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. Her apartment building seemed normal until she noticed a woman with a press badge waiting in the lobby. Sarah used her keycard to enter through the parking garage and took the stairs to avoid the elevator. Inside her apartment, she poured a glass of wine and sat on her couch, staring at the medals and commendations she had hidden in a drawer for 3 years. The Bronze Stars, the Silver Star, the Navy Cross, each one representing missions she could barely discuss and achievements she had been unwilling to claim. Her landline rang, and she almost didn't answer it until she saw her sister Maria's number on the caller ID. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? I've had 3 reporters call me asking about your military service. I didn't even know you were in the Navy." The conversation with her sister was difficult. Sarah had never told her family the full truth about her military service, letting them believe she had worked in intelligence and support roles. Learning that their quiet, bookish sister had been a Navy SEAL sniper was as shocking to them as it had been to her Pentagon colleagues. "Why didn't you tell us?" Maria asked. "Because I wanted to put it behind me. I wanted to be normal." "Sarah, this isn't something you put behind you. This is who you are." "No, it's who I was. I'm different now." "Are you?" "Because from what I'm reading, you just told a room full of men exactly who you are when they challenged you. That doesn't sound like someone who's completely left her past behind." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her apartment and realized that her sister was right. She had spent 3 years trying to be someone else, but when pushed, her true nature had emerged. The question now was whether she was ready to stop running from who she had been and figure out who she wanted to become. Outside her window, she could see news vans beginning to gather in the street below. The world was waiting for her story, and she was running out of time to decide how much of it she was willing to share. The medals in her hands felt heavier than she remembered, weighted with memories she had tried to suppress and achievements she had been afraid to claim. For the first time in years, she wondered if hiding from her past had been more damaging than embracing it. Tomorrow, she would have to give Rebecca Chen an answer. Tonight, she would have to decide whether she was ready to stop being afraid of her own story. The CBS studios in Washington felt like enemy territory as Sarah walked through the hallways toward the interview set. She had chosen to wear her navy dress blue uniform, the first time she had put it on in 8 years. The weight of the medals on her chest felt both foreign and familiar, like wearing armor she had forgotten she owned. Amanda Foster was everything Rebecca Chen had promised: professional, prepared, and perceptive enough to read the tension in Sarah's movements as she took her seat across from the veteran journalist. "Thank you for agreeing to do this interview, Sarah," Foster began as the camera crew made final adjustments. "I know this isn't easy for you." "No, it's not," Sarah replied honestly. "But I realized that if my story was going to be told, I wanted to be the one telling it." The interview started with basic questions about her background, her decision to join the military, and the unprecedented nature of a woman serving as a Navy SEAL sniper. Sarah answered carefully, sticking to facts and avoiding the emotional weight behind her choices. "You graduated at the top of your SEAL training class," Foster noted, consulting her notes. "But women weren't officially allowed in special operations at that time. How did that happen?" Sarah had prepared for this question knowing it would be the first thing people wanted to understand. "It was a unique situation. I had already served as a Marine Corps sniper and had specialized skills that were needed for a specific operation. Sometimes military necessity overrides traditional protocols. But it wasn't just one operation, was it? Your service record shows 6 years of active duty with the SEALs." "That's correct. Once I proved my capabilities, I was allowed to continue serving with the unit." Foster leaned forward slightly. "What was it like being the only woman in that environment?" Sarah paused, remembering the isolation, the constant pressure to prove herself, and the bonds she had formed with teammates who initially saw her as a liability. "Challenging. I had to earn respect every day. I had to be better than good enough, because any mistake would be seen as proof that women couldn't handle the job." "Did you face discrimination or harassment?" "I faced skepticism, which I understand. These men were trusting their lives to someone they'd never worked with before. I had to prove I belonged there." Foster nodded and moved to more difficult territory. "Your last operation was called Silent Guardian. Can you tell us what happened?" Sarah felt her chest tighten. This was the part of the story she had dreaded most. I can't discuss operational details, but I can say it was a rescue mission that went longer and became more dangerous than originally planned. You left the SEALs immediately after that mission. Why? The question hung in the air while Sarah struggled with how much truth she was ready to share. She could give the standard answer about wanting to pursue other opportunities, or she could be honest about the cost of war on the human soul. I lost someone very important to me on that mission, she said finally. Someone who was my partner, my friend, and my responsibility. I realized I couldn't continue carrying that weight. Foster's expression softened. Your spotter? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Can you tell us about him? Jake Morrison was the best spotter in the teams. He was also my best friend. He was killed while we were holding position to protect an evacuation. He died doing his job, but I couldn't help feeling responsible. Was he your only casualty in 6 years? No, but he was the one that broke me. The raw honesty of her answer surprised both Foster and herself. This wasn't the carefully controlled narrative she had planned to share. After losing Jake, you left the military entirely and became an intelligence analyst. That's quite a career change. I wanted to use my knowledge to help people, but from a distance. I thought I could contribute without having to carry a weapon again. But last week, you revealed your background to a room full of defense contractors and military officials. What prompted that decision? Sarah thought about Morrison's smug dismissal, about 3 years of being invisible, about the weight of pretending to be less than she was. I was tired of being underestimated. These men were questioning my qualifications based on assumptions about who I was, not knowledge of what I had done. I spent 6 years proving myself in the most elite military unit in the world. I wasn't going to sit there and let someone tell me I didn't understand combat. How did they react? For the first time during the interview, Sarah smiled. Shock. Complete shock. I don't think anyone in that room had ever met a female SEAL sniper before. Since your story became public, you've received both praise and criticism. Some people have questioned whether women should serve in combat roles. How do you respond to that? Sarah had anticipated this question and had given it considerable thought. I respond with my service record. I completed every mission successfully. I protected my teammates and accomplished objectives that saved lives. Anyone who questions women in combat is questioning results, not theory. Foster consulted her notes again. You mentioned having the highest accuracy rate in SEAL history. Can you elaborate on that? I was a good shot, Sarah said simply. Your commanding officers describe you as exceptional. Admiral Richardson called you the most effective sniper he'd ever worked with. Sarah looked uncomfortable with the praise. I had good training and good teammates. You're being modest. Your record shows confirmed kills at distances that most snipers couldn't attempt. Distance shooting was my specialty. But it's not about the individual shots. It's about the mission and the team. Foster leaned back, studying Sarah's face. You seem uncomfortable discussing your achievements. Because they came at a cost. Every successful mission meant someone else didn't go home to their family. That's not something to be proud of, even when it was necessary. Do you ever think about returning to military service?
No,
Sarah replied quickly.
that chapter of my life is closed. But you're still serving, in a way.
Your work as an intelligence analyst contributes to military operations. Quote, it's different. I'm providing information, not taking lives. Foster moved toward the conclusion of the interview. What do you want people to understand about your story? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. I want them to understand that service comes in many forms, that women are capable of anything men can do if given the opportunity, and that sometimes the hardest part of being a warrior isn't the fighting, it's learning how to live with what you've had to do. Any regrets about my service? No. I'm proud of what I accomplished and the lives I helped save. About hiding from it for 3 years? Maybe. But I needed that time to figure out who I was after the war. And who are you now? Sarah looked directly into the camera for the first time during the interview. I'm someone who served my country, paid a price for that service, and is trying to contribute in a new way. I'm not the same person who enlisted 18 years ago, and I'm not the same person who left the SEALs 8 years ago. But I'm finally ready to stop apologizing for who I've been. After the cameras stopped rolling, Foster shook Sarah's hand. That was powerful. You should be proud of how you handled that. Thank you. It was harder than I expected. The best interviews usually are. When people see this, they're going to understand why you've kept quiet for so long. But they're also going to understand why your story needed to be told. Sarah left the studio, feeling drained but relieved. For the first time in 8 years, she had talked openly about Jake Morrison, about the cost of her service, and about the weight she had been carrying in silence. Her phone was buzzing with messages when she turned it back on. Director Thompson had texted, "Watched the live feed. Well done. Take tomorrow off." There were also messages from her sister, from colleagues, and surprisingly, from several former teammates she hadn't heard from in years. Word of the interview had apparently spread quickly through military circles, but the message that stopped her cold was from a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah, this is Jake's sister Emma. I saw the news story about you. Could we meet? I have something I think you need to see." Sarah stared at the message, her hands shaking slightly. She had never met Jake's family, had been too devastated after his death to attend his funeral, and had spent 8 years carrying guilt about his loss. The prospect of facing his sister was terrifying and necessary in equal measure. She typed back, "Yes. When and where?" The response came quickly. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Arlington Cemetery. His grave is in Section 60. Sarah realized that her public revelation was about to become even more personal. Tomorrow she would face the family of the man whose death had ended her military career and changed the course of her life. That night she sat in her apartment, looking at a photograph she had kept hidden for 8 years. It showed her and Jake in full combat gear after a successful mission, both grinning at the camera with the exhausted relief of soldiers who had survived another dangerous day. She had been afraid to look at that photograph for so long, afraid of the memories and guilt it would trigger. But tonight, she saw something different. She saw 2 professional soldiers who had trusted each other completely, who had done their jobs with honor, and who had saved lives together. Maybe it was time to stop running from Jake's memory and start honoring it instead. Maybe his sister had something to say that would help her finally make peace with the past. The interview would air in 2 days, and then the whole country would know her story. But tomorrow, she would learn something that might change how she understood that story herself. In Section 60 of Arlington Cemetery, surrounded by the graves of young soldiers who had given everything for their country, Sarah would discover that some secrets are too important to stay buried, and that healing sometimes requires facing the very memories we've spent years trying to forget. Arlington National Cemetery was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the trees. Sarah arrived early, needing time to prepare herself for a conversation she had avoided for 8 years. Section 60 housed the graves of soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, row after row of white headstones marking young lives cut short by war. She found Jake's grave easily, his name etched in marble along with his rank, dates of service, and the simple phrase, Navy SEAL. Someone had left fresh flowers recently, and a small American flag fluttered in the breeze. "I should have come here years ago," she whispered to the stone. "I'm sorry, Jake. You came when you were ready." Sarah turned to find a woman about her own age approaching, carrying a bouquet of roses. Emma Morrison had Jake's eyes and his gentle smile, but there was a strength in her bearing that reminded Sarah of her brother's quiet confidence.
"You must be Sarah," Emma said, extending her hand.
"Thank you for agreeing to meet me." They shook hands, and Sarah felt the weight of years of avoided grief settling around them. "I should have contacted your family after Jake's death," Sarah said. "I was too devastated to think clearly, and then too much time passed." "You were dealing with your own trauma," Emma replied gently. "Jake wrote about you in his letters home. He said you were the best partner he'd ever worked with, and more importantly, that you were his friend." Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in years. "Losing him destroyed me." Emma placed the roses at Jake's headstone and gestured toward a nearby bench. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I watched your interview yesterday, and I think there are some things about that last mission that you need to know." They sat together in the shadow of Jake's grave, and Emma pulled a worn envelope from her purse. "This is Jake's last letter to me. It was written the day before Operation Silent Guardian. I've never shown it to anyone, but after hearing your interview, I think you need to read it." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Jake's, and seeing it again brought back memories of mission briefings where he would take meticulous notes in that same careful script.
"Are you sure?" Sarah asked.
"I'm sure. Jake would want you to know what he wrote." Sarah opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Emma, we have a big mission coming up tomorrow. Can't tell you details, but it's the kind of operation we train for our whole careers. I'm partnered with Sarah Martinez, who I've mentioned before. She's the best sniper I've ever worked with. But more than that, she's become like a sister to me." Sarah carries a lot of weight on her shoulders. She feels responsible for everyone on the team, like any mistake or casualty is her fault. I've tried to tell her that we all chose this job, that we all know the risks, but she has a hard time accepting that. If something happens to me tomorrow, I need you to know it won't be because Sarah made a mistake. It will be because sometimes good soldiers die doing their job. She would blame herself, and I can't bear the thought of her carrying that guilt. I've written a letter for Sarah too, sealed and in my gear. If I don't make it back, please make sure she gets it. She'll need to know that serving with her has been the honor of my career, and that I trust her completely. Take care of yourself, Em. Give Mom and Dad my love. Your brother, Jake. Sarah finished reading and sat in stunned silence. All these years she had blamed herself for Jake's death, convinced that she could have somehow saved him if she had been better, faster, more careful. There's more, Emma said quietly, pulling another envelope from her purse. This is the letter Jake wrote for you. It was in his gear when his body was recovered. The Navy sent it to us with his personal effects. Sarah stared at the envelope with her name written in Jake's handwriting. Why didn't they give this to me? Because you left the service before they could track you down. You disappeared so completely that they couldn't find you to deliver it. We've been holding it for 8 years, hoping someday we'd be able to get it to you. With shaking hands, Sarah opened the second letter.
Sarah, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I didn't make it home from our mission.
I'm writing this because I know you well enough to know that you're going to blame yourself, and I can't let that happen. You are the finest soldier I've ever served with. You're also one of the best people I've ever known. Whatever happened to me wasn't your fault. We both knew the risks when we signed up for this job, and we both accepted them. I want you to promise me something. Don't let my death end your career or define your life. You have too much to offer, too many people to help, too many missions to complete. The world needs people like you, Sarah. Don't deprive it of your talents because of guilt. Live for both of us, love for both of us. Find peace for both of us. You've been the best partner and the best friend a soldier could ask for. Serving with you has been the greatest honor of my career. Watch over our team. They'll need you. Your friend always, Jake. Sarah was crying now. 8 years of suppressed grief finally finding release. Emma put her arm around her shoulders and let her cry, understanding that this was a conversation that needed to happen.
He knew,
Sarah whispered through her tears. He knew I would blame myself. He also knew you well enough to know that you were strong enough to carry on, Emma replied. He believed in you, Sarah. He always did. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts and memories. Finally, Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at Emma. Why now? Why bring me these letters after all these years? Because when I saw your interview, I realized you were still carrying the guilt Jake was trying to spare you from. You left the military, hid your service record, and spent years punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. But he died because I couldn't protect him.
he died because he was a soldier doing his job in a war zone.
Just like you were doing yours. Jake's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't a failure. Emma stood and walked back to Jake's grave, touching the headstone gently. My brother wrote about the mission that killed him. Not details, but his feelings about it. He said it was the most important operation of his career, that hundreds of lives were at stake. He was proud to be part of it, Sarah. Proud to serve with you. Sarah joined her at the grave, reading Jake's name through fresh tears. I've wasted 8 years running from his memory. No, you've spent 8 years healing from trauma. There's a difference. And you've also spent those years serving your country in a new way, using your skills to help people. That's not waste, that's honor. Sarah thought about her work as an intelligence analyst, about the missions she had supported from behind a desk, about the lives that had been saved because of information she had provided. Jake would be proud of what you've become, Emma continued. But he would also want you to stop hiding from what you've accomplished. They walked slowly through Section 60, past rows of graves representing young lives lost in service to their country. Sarah realized that each stone represented not just a death, but a choice. The choice to serve despite the risks, to put others before themselves, to sacrifice for something greater than their own safety. What are you going to do now? Emma asked as they reached the cemetery entrance. I don't know, Sarah admitted. For the first time in 8 years, I feel like I have choices again. Real choices, not just ways to hide.
Jake's letter mentioned watching over your team.
Do you still talk to any of them? No. I cut all ties when I left. Maybe it's time to change that. Sarah nodded, realizing that Emma was right. She had spent so long running from her past that she had abandoned relationships and responsibilities that might have helped her heal. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with Jake's letters on her coffee table, along with her service medals and the photo of her and Jake after their successful mission. For the first time in years, she didn't see objects of guilt and pain. She saw reminders of service, friendship, and purpose. Her laptop was open to a message she had been drafting to Admiral Richardson, asking about opportunities to work with current SEAL teams as a trainer or consultant. Her skills were still valuable, her experience still relevant, and her knowledge could help prepare the next generation of operators. She had also written emails to 3 former teammates, reaching out after years of silence to reconnect with people who had shared the most intense experiences of her life. The interview would air tomorrow night, and Sarah knew her life would change again. But this time, she felt ready for the attention, ready to own her story instead of running from it. Her phone rang, and she saw Director Thompson's number. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. Admiral Richardson called me today. Apparently your interview has generated significant interest at the highest levels of the Pentagon." "What kind of interest?" "The good kind. There's talk of bringing you in as a consultant for special operations training, maybe developing new protocols based on your experience. They want someone who understands both the operational and analytical sides of intelligence work." Sarah smiled, thinking about Jake's letter urging her not to let his death end her career. "That sounds interesting. Can you set up a meeting?" "Already done. Monday morning, 10 a.m. After hanging up, Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the city lights. For 8 years, she had tried to make herself smaller, quieter, less threatening to people who might question her place in their world. Tomorrow, her story would be broadcast to millions of people, and there would be nowhere left to hide. But hiding wasn't the goal anymore. Jake's letters had reminded her that she had work to do, people to help, and a life to live. She had been one of the best soldiers of her generation, and that expertise could still serve her country in new ways.
Sarah picked up Jake's photo and looked into the eyes of her fallen friend.
"I promise," she said quietly. "I'll stop running. I'll live for both of us." Outside her window, the city hummed with activity, full of people living their own complex stories of service, sacrifice, and redemption. Sarah Martinez was ready to rejoin that world, no longer as the invisible analyst hiding from her past, but as a decorated veteran prepared to shape the future. The quiet woman who had shocked a briefing room with her revelations was finally ready to stop being quiet. Her real work was just beginning.